I am Gabriella, 32 years old, a graphic designer from Chicago with a sister-in-law who has made it her mission to tear me down at every family gathering. But last Sunday at my parents' 40th anniversary dinner, Vanessa went too far. She stood up, pointed at me, and screamed that I had stolen her wallet. The faces around that table when the truth finally came out, priceless. And I saw it all coming. Let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button as I reveal how justice was finally served. To understand what happened at that dinner, you need to understand Vanessa. From the moment my brother Eric introduced her to our family 6 years ago, she has been on a mission to establish herself as the queen bee of our family. Vanessa comes from money and never lets anyone forget it. Her father owns a chain of luxury car dealerships across the Midwest, and she grew up with the kind of privilege that apparently taught her that other people exist mainly to admire her. In the beginning, I tried to welcome her. I genuinely wanted my brother to be happy, and if Vanessa was his choice, I was determined to make it work. I invited her to lunch, suggested shopping trips, even offered to help plan their wedding. Each time, Vanessa found ways to subtly put me down. She would comment on my simple apartment, ask if my clothes were from a discount store, or suggest that my career as a graphic designer was cute, but not really important like her job in her father's business. The worst moments always came during family gatherings. 3 Christmases ago, she accidentally spilled red wine all over the dress I had spent weeks designing and making myself. Last Thanksgiving, she mentioned loudly that it was so brave of me to come to dinner alone again while everyone else had partners. At my niece Lucy's baptism, she told extended family members that my gift for the baby was thoughtful considering what you can afford. I tried to maintain peace, swallowing my pride and forcing smiles through gritted teeth. Not for Vanessa's sake, but for Eric, who seemed blind to his wife's behavior, and for my sweet niece Lucy, who deserved a family that could at least pretend to get along. Lucy is 4 now, innocent and loving, and the thought of causing drama that might affect her relationship with any family member kept me silent for years. My parents, David and Marie, are in their late 60s now. They have always been peacekeepers, the kind of people who believe family harmony is worth almost any personal sacrifice. Dad worked as a high school principal for 35 years, Mom as a nurse. They raised us to believe that forgiveness was strength and that family bonds were sacred. When Vanessa's behavior became impossible to ignore, they would gently change the subject or find reasons to separate us into different rooms. Eric, my older brother by 2 years, has always been caught in the middle. Growing up, we were close. He protected me from bullies in school, taught me to ride a bike, and was my confidant through the turbulent teenage years. But after meeting Vanessa, something changed. He became distant, canceling our traditional monthly sibling dinners and making excuses when I tried to see him alone. On the rare occasions when I tried to gently bring up Vanessa's treatment of me, he would get defensive, accusing me of being jealous or oversensitive. "She just has a different communication style, Gabs," he would say. "You need to try harder to understand her." My younger sister Julia was my only true ally. 3 years younger than me, Julia has always been the family rebel, speaking her mind regardless of consequences. She saw through Vanessa immediately and had no problem calling out bad behavior. This made her Vanessa's second favorite target, though Julia cared far less about the jabs than I did. "You know what your problem is," Julia told me once. "You still care what that witch thinks. Stop giving her the power." Easier said than done when every family event became a psychological battlefield. The events leading to the infamous dinner began 3 months earlier when my parents announced they would be celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. This was a milestone that deserved something special, so I volunteered to help organize a dinner at their favorite restaurant, an upscale Italian place where they had their first date. I spent weeks planning everything from the custom menu to the playlist of songs that had been meaningful throughout their marriage. I arranged for their oldest friends to attend collected family photos for a slideshow and designed beautiful custom invitations. Naturally, Vanessa had to insert herself. First, she called the restaurant behind my back to change the reservation time, claiming it was more convenient for everyone but not bothering to check if that was true. Then she contacted the guests I had invited to suggest a different dress code than the one I had indicated. She even went so far as to order an entirely different cake than the one I had carefully selected based on my parents' favorite flavors, claiming that her choice was more sophisticated. When I confronted her about these changes, she played innocent. "Oh, I thought we were planning this together," she said with wide eyes. "Eric told me you probably needed help since you have so little experience with this kind of upscale event." My brother denied saying any such thing but also refused to ask Vanessa to back off. So I adjusted, compromised, and kept my focus on making the evening special for my parents. By the time the day arrived, I was exhausted from navigating Vanessa's interference but determined not to let it ruin the celebration. The anniversary dinner was set at Salvatore's, the charming Italian restaurant tucked away in Chicago's Little Italy neighborhood where my parents had their first date in 1983. The owner, Giovanni, was the son of the original proprietor who had served my parents back then, and he had helped me reserve their most romantic corner table and arrange for a special menu featuring updated versions of what they ate on that slash. First night. The private dining room glowed with soft amber lighting from vintage chandeliers, and each table featured a centerpiece of red and white roses, my mother's favorites. The walls were lined with black and white photographs of old-world Italy, and the scent of garlic fresh bread and tomato sauce filled the air. I had arrived 2 hours early to personally place framed photos of my parents throughout their marriage on a special memory table by the entrance, along with the anniversary gift. I had spent months creating a hand-illustrated family tree, tracing both their lineages back 4 generations. By 7 o'clock, guests began arriving. My parents entered to applause Mom, stunning in a navy blue dress that brought out her eyes, Dad beaming with pride beside her in the suit he had worn at their 25th anniversary, recently altered to fit his now slimmer frame. The joy on their faces made all the planning stress worthwhile. Until Vanessa arrived. She and Eric were 15 minutes late, which I later learned was because Vanessa had insisted on changing outfits 3 times. She swept in wearing a red designer dress that was frankly too formal for the occasion, diamonds glittering at her ears, neck, and wrists. Lucy trailed behind in a miniature version of her mother's outfit, looking uncomfortable and tugging at the tight collar. "So sorry we're late," Vanessa announced loudly, air kissing my mother's cheeks. "Traffic was dreadful, and I simply had to make sure we looked appropriate. Some of us understand the importance of presentation at significant events." Her eyes flickered to my simple black cocktail dress, which I had chosen specifically to not draw attention away from my mother. I saw the slight frown cross my mom's face, but true to form, she simply thanked Vanessa for coming and complimented Lucy's dress. The seating arrangement had been carefully planned. I had placed my parents at the center of the main table with their oldest friends flanking them. Eric, Vanessa, and Lucy were seated at one end, while Julia and I were at the other, with extended family and friends filling in the remaining spots. This arrangement was meant to allow my parents easy conversation with their dearest friends while keeping Vanessa and me at a safe distance from each other. But Vanessa had other plans. As everyone moved toward their seats, she loudly declared, "Oh, there must be a mistake. As the eldest son's wife, I should be seated next to Marie. Family should be closest on such an important occasion, don't you think?" Before I could intervene, she had moved the place cards, displacing my mother's best friend Helen, who had flown in from Arizona specifically for this event. The ripple effect forced several other guests to shuffle positions, creating confusion and awkward glances. I caught Julia's eye across the table, and she subtly shook her head, warning me not to make a scene. Throughout the appetizer course, Vanessa dominated the conversation, repeatedly steering it toward her recent achievements. She had just been promoted to marketing director at her father's company, though everyone knew it was a position created specifically for her with no real responsibilities. "It's just so rewarding to be recognized for hard work," she said, looking pointedly at me. "Not everyone understands the dedication it takes to succeed in the corporate world. Some people choose easier, more creative paths, which is fine too, I suppose." My father, ever the diplomat, tried to include me in the conversation. "Gabriella just completed a major branding project for that new tech startup. What was it called again, sweetheart?" Before I could answer, Vanessa cut in. Oh, David, speaking of technology, did I tell you about the new partnership I negotiated with Tesla Daddy? Says it's the biggest deal our company has ever made. The conversation continued in this vein, with Vanessa interrupting, redirecting, and subtly undermining anyone else's contributions, particularly mine. I focused on making sure the service ran smoothly, quietly, conferring with waitstaff about timing and special dietary needs of certain guests. It was during one of these moments, as I returned to my seat from speaking with the head waiter, that I noticed something odd. Vanessa had left the table briefly, claiming she needed to freshen up. As she returned, I saw her reach into her oversized designer handbag and carefully tuck something into an inner pocket. From my angle, I caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a second wallet, different from the red leather designer wallet I had seen her use earlier when she ostentatiously left an overly large tip for the coat check attendant. My first thought was that perhaps it was an old wallet of hers that she had found in her bag and was putting away, but something about the furtive way she glanced around as she did it triggered my suspicion. Over the years, I had become attuned to Vanessa's body language when she was planning something malicious. She had a slight tightening around her eyes that I had learned to recognize as her plotting face. I saw that look now, and it sent a chill down my spine. For a moment, I considered confronting her immediately, but several factors held me back. First, this was my parents' special night, and they had endured enough tension between Vanessa and me over the years. Second, without knowing exactly what she was planning, any accusation I made would sound paranoid and petty. Third, and perhaps most importantly, a small voice inside me whispered that sometimes the best response to a trap is to let it be sprung, but on your own terms. So I watched and waited, maintaining a pleasant expression while my mind raced. I noticed that after returning to her seat, Vanessa positioned her large handbag on the floor between her chair and mine, despite there being a perfectly good handbag hook under the table at her seat. The bag was notably within reach of my chair, another detail that seemed deliberately staged. Throughout the main course, I engaged warmly with other guests while keeping a peripheral awareness of Vanessa's bag. I saw her check it several times, ostensibly looking for her phone or a tissue, but always with that calculating expression. Whatever game she was playing, it was clear she was setting the stage carefully. And for the first time in our long history of conflict, I felt one step ahead of her. The tension in the private dining room escalated during the main course. What should have been a celebration of my parents' love story was increasingly feeling like navigating a conversational minefield. The elegant plates of osso buco and handmade pasta seemed to fade into the background as the emotional undercurrents grew stronger. Uncle Robert, my father's brother, who never quite mastered the art of reading a room, innocently brought up the topic of the family cabin in Michigan. So, David, have you decided who gets the cabin and the will? Not to be morbid at your anniversary, but I was talking to my financial advisor about family assets and inheritance planning. A heavy silence fell over the table. The cabin had been in our family for 3 generations and was a source of countless happy memories for Eric, Julia, and me. It was also, unfortunately, a source of tension, since Vanessa had made no secret of her desire to renovate it into what she called a proper lake house and essentially claim it as her own. We haven't made any final decisions, my father said, carefully looking uncomfortable. That's not really dinner conversation, Robert. But Vanessa seized the opportunity. Well, since it came up, Eric and I have actually been discussing some wonderful ideas for modernizing the cabin. It needs substantial work, and we would be willing to invest in those renovations if, well, you know. She smiled sweetly. It would be such a special place for Lucy to grow up visiting, just like Eric did. The implication was clear: the cabin should go to them because they had a child. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the one that always appeared when Vanessa leveraged her status as the mother of the only grandchild to gain advantage. The cabin is perfect as it is, I said, trying to keep my voice light. The whole point is its rustic charm and family history. Modernizing it would erase what makes it special. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. That is such a typical response from someone resistant to positive change. The cabin has plumbing from the 1960s, Gabriella. Surely even you can see that needs updating at minimum. There is a difference between necessary updates and completely changing the character of a place, I replied. My mother, sensing the brewing storm, quickly changed the subject to Julia's recent promotion at the hospital, where she worked as a pediatric nurse. But Vanessa was not finished stirring the pot. Speaking of careers, she interjected after letting Julia speak for barely 30 seconds. I heard that graphic design jobs are being rapidly replaced by artificial intelligence. Gabriella, are you concerned? It must be so stressful working in a dying field. I felt all eyes at the table turn to me. This was classic Vanessa, raising a topic specifically designed to put me on the defensive in front of everyone. Actually, I replied, maintaining a calm smile, human creativity, and understanding of emotional resonance are exactly what AI cannot replicate. My client list is growing because companies recognize that connection. But thank you for your concern about my career. The conversation continued to bounce between pleasant reminiscences about my parents' marriage and Vanessa's pointed barbs directed primarily at me. By the time dessert was about to be served, I felt emotionally drained from the constant vigilance required to navigate her attacks while maintaining a positive atmosphere. Excuse me for a moment, I said, standing up. I need to check with the kitchen about the anniversary cake. In truth, I simply needed a moment of peace away from Vanessa's calculating gaze and subtle jabs. I made my way to the restaurant's small outdoor patio, which was empty due to the slightly chilly evening air. Taking a deep breath, I leaned against the stone balustrade and looked up at the few visible stars fighting through Chicago's light pollution. In that quiet moment, I considered my options. I could continue the pattern of the past 6 years, deflecting Vanessa's attacks and minimizing conflict for the sake of family harmony. I could escalate, finally calling her out publicly on her behavior. Or I could find some middle path, one that protected my dignity without creating a scene that would ruin my parents' celebration. As I stood there contemplating, I also remembered the strange behavior I had observed earlier, with Vanessa secreting away what looked like a second wallet. Whatever she was planning, it was clearly meant to unfold tonight. The thought sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. After about 5 minutes, I knew I needed to return to avoid drawing attention or concern. As I walked back through the restaurant, I noticed Giovanni, the owner, speaking with one of the waiters and gesturing toward our private room. He caught my eye and gave me a quick, reassuring nod. I had explained the family dynamics to him during the planning stages, and he had promised to help ensure the evening went smoothly. That small gesture of support strengthened my resolve to maintain composure regardless of what Vanessa might do. I returned to find dessert being served, a delicate tiramisu that was my mother's favorite. As I took my seat, I noticed immediately that something had changed. Vanessa was sitting straighter, an almost imperceptible smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Eric looked tense beside her, staring down at his dessert as if it contained answers to questions he didn't want to ask. My father was in the middle of a story about their honeymoon in Venice, but Vanessa was barely pretending to listen, her eyes flicking between me and her handbag, which was still positioned between our chairs. I had just taken my first bite of tiramisu when Vanessa suddenly gasped loudly, cutting off my father mid-sentence. "My wallet!" she exclaimed, her hand flying to her chest in an exaggerated gesture of distress. "I cannot find my wallet." All conversation at the table instantly ceased. Every head turned toward Vanessa, who was now making a show of searching through her handbag. "Are you sure you brought it?" my mother asked, concerned. "Did you check your coat?" "Of course I brought it," Vanessa snapped, then quickly composed her features into a mask of worry. "I had it right here. I paid the coat check with it when we arrived. Someone must have taken it." She began looking around frantically, peering under the table, and asking others to check near their seats. I noticed she was careful to direct everyone's attention away from her own handbag, where I suspected the missing wallet was still safely hidden. "Perhaps you left it in the restroom," suggested Helen, my mother's friend. No, Vanessa insisted, her voice rising dramatically. "It was right here in my bag. It has all my credit cards, my driver's license, even pictures of Lucy that cannot be replaced." As the search expanded, and guests began standing up to check under their chairs, I saw Vanessa's eyes repeatedly dart toward me, gauging my reaction. I maintained a neutral expression, helping to look around my area of the table even as I felt the trap beginning to close. Wait, Vanessa said suddenly, her voice dropping to a theatrical hush. When did you leave the table earlier, Gabriella? And where exactly did you go? The question hung in the air like a thundercloud. Several people looked confused, not immediately understanding the implication, but I knew exactly what she was doing. I went to the patio for some fresh air, I replied evenly, and then I spoke with Giovanni about the cake. Why do you ask? Vanessa's eyes narrowed, and I saw the satisfaction in them that told me I had walked right into her script. Isn't it strange, she said slowly, that my wallet disappears right when you leave the table and you were gone for quite some time, weren't you? The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. I could feel the uncomfortable tension as guests began to realize what Vanessa was suggesting. My mother looked stricken, my father confused and distressed. Julia was halfway out of her seat, fury evident on her face, but I caught her eye and subtly shook my head. This was between Vanessa and me. Are you suggesting I took your wallet? I asked, keeping my voice steady. That's a serious accusation, Vanessa. She didn't respond directly, instead turning to the table at large. Has anyone seen my wallet? It's red leather Prada with a gold clasp, very distinctive and obviously valuable. No one had, of course, because I was increasingly certain it was exactly where Vanessa had hidden it, waiting for her dramatic reveal. The private dining room at Salvatore's had fallen completely silent. The waitstaff, sensing the tension, had discreetly withdrawn to the periphery. Even the soft Italian music that had been playing in the background seemed to have dimmed, as if the restaurant itself was holding its breath. Vanessa stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that cut through the silence like a knife. Every eye in the room was on her as she drew herself up to her full height, her expression transforming from worried search to righteous anger in an instant. You, she said, pointing directly at me, her voice rising to a near shout. You stole my wallet, you filthy thief. The accusation hung in the air, so outrageous and unexpected that for a moment no one reacted. My father was the first to recover. Now, Vanessa, he began, his principal's voice of authority making a rare appearance. That is a very serious allegation to make without any evidence. But Vanessa was not to be deterred. She was fully committed to her performance, now her face flushed with what appeared to the others as genuine outrage. I have suspected for years that things go missing when Gabriella is around, she continued. A pair of earrings from our guest bathroom, money from Eric's wallet, even Lucy's birthday gift card last year. I never said anything because I wanted to keep the peace, but this is too much. I felt as if I had been physically struck. Not only was she accusing me of stealing her wallet tonight, but she was retroactively blaming me for other alleged thefts, none of which I had ever heard about before this moment. I glanced at Eric, expecting him to defend me, but he was staring at the tablecloth, his face unreadable. That is absolutely not true, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I have never taken anything that does not belong to me. Not tonight, and not ever. My denial seemed to fuel Vanessa's performance. She turned to the table at large, her expression now one of sad vindication. You see how she lies, always so perfect, so innocent. Gabriella, the graphic designer, Gabriella, the devoted daughter, Gabriella, who everyone loves, but I know what she really is. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked confused, others embarrassed to be witnessing this family drama. My mother had tears in her eyes, and my father looked older than I had ever seen him, the lines in his face deepened by distress. I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Humiliation burned through me as I sat accused in front of friends and family. Anger pulsed in my temples at the sheer injustice of it. But beneath those immediate reactions, a strange calm was forming. I knew what was coming. I had seen the setup, recognized the trap. And while part of me wanted to leap to my feet and scream the truth, another part, a stronger part, counseled patience. Let her play out her hand completely. I do not appreciate being called a thief or a liar, I said, keeping my voice low and controlled, especially not at our parents' anniversary celebration. Vanessa's eyes gleamed with triumph at what she clearly interpreted as a weak defense. and then she made her move, the one I had been waiting for. "Well, if you're so innocent," she said with a smirk, "you won't mind if we check your things." Before I could respond, she reached down toward my feet, where my small clutch purse sat beside the chair. I had deliberately chosen a tiny evening bag that could hold only my phone, lipstick, and keys, specifically to avoid carrying anything unnecessary that might detract from helping manage the event. "That's hardly large enough to hide a wallet," Julia pointed out sharply. "No," Vanessa agreed, straightening up with a predatory smile. "But this is—" She reached for the large tote bag that had been sitting between our chairs, the one I knew belonged to her, but that she now implied was mine. "That's not my bag," I said calmly. "Oh," Vanessa raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Then whose is it? It's been sitting right next to you all evening." Before I could respond, she made a show of opening the tote bag and dramatically reaching inside. The look of satisfaction on her face as her hand closed around what she was seeking made my stomach turn, even though I had anticipated this exact moment. "Well, well, well," she said, her voice dripping with mock surprise, as she triumphantly pulled out her red Prada wallet. "What do we have here? My wallet in your bag. See, I knew it was you." The collective gasp from around the table was audible. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide with shock. My father looked stricken, torn between his instinct to believe in his daughter and the seemingly irrefutable evidence before him. Gabriella Eric finally spoke, his voice a mixture of confusion and disappointment. "How could you?" That hurt more than anything else, the immediate assumption of my guilt from my own brother. 6 years of Vanessa's influence had eroded his faith in me so completely that he didn't even question this absurd scenario. The triumph in Vanessa's eyes as she surveyed the shocked faces around the table was unmistakable. She had orchestrated her moment perfectly, creating a scene where I appeared undeniably guilty. In her mind, she had finally won our long, unspoken competition, humiliating me so thoroughly that I would never recover my standing in the family. What she hadn't counted on was that I had seen it coming from the beginning. The shocked silence that followed Vanessa's theatrical revelation seemed to stretch into eternity. My family and their friends stared at the red wallet in her hand. Then, at me, their faces, a mixture of confusion, disappointment, and discomfort. The perfect anniversary celebration had derailed spectacularly, and I was now the apparent villain of the evening. And then I did the last thing anyone expected. I laughed. It started as a small chuckle, then grew into full, genuine laughter that I couldn't have suppressed if I tried. The absurdity of the situation, the elaborate trap Vanessa had set, and the fact that she thought she had finally outmaneuvered me, all struck me as hilarious in that moment of tension. The laughter broke the frozen tableau. Vanessa's triumphant expression faltered confusion, and then anger replacing it as she realized this was not the reaction she had anticipated. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded. "I just caught you red-handed stealing my wallet and you're laughing." I took a deep breath, composing myself, though a smile remained on my face. "I'm laughing, Vanessa, because that is not your bag and we both know it. That's your bag." I pointed to the designer tote that had been between our chairs all evening. "You placed it there deliberately and you put your second wallet inside it earlier this evening." Her face paled slightly, but she rallied quickly. "What are you talking about? This is obviously your bag and my wallet was inside it." "Actually," I said calmly, "if you look inside that bag you'll find it contains things that belong to you, not me. Perhaps your makeup compact with your initials, or the specific brand of hand sanitizer you always carry, or maybe even the little notebook where you write down perceived slights from family members to bring up later." I had been observing Vanessa carefully for years, noting these small details that most people missed. The look of shock that flashed across her face told me I had hit close to the mark with at least some of my guesses. "You're trying to confuse everyone," Vanessa insisted, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. "The fact remains that my wallet was in this bag next to your chair." "Yes," I agreed. "In your bag, which you carefully positioned to appear as if it might be mine after I watched you place a second wallet inside it when you returned from the restroom earlier." Gasps and murmurs spread around the table as the implications of what I was saying began to sink in. My mother's expression shifted from distress to confusion, my father's from disappointment to careful consideration. That's absurd, Vanessa scoffed, but there was a note of panic entering her voice now. Why would I carry 2 wallets? An excellent question, I replied. One that I asked myself when I saw you tuck something that looked remarkably like a wallet into that bag earlier. At first I thought perhaps you had found an old wallet in your purse. But then I noticed how carefully you positioned the bag between our chairs and how you kept glancing at me throughout dinner with that calculating look you get when you're planning something. I turned to address the table at large. What Vanessa didn't realize is that I've spent 6 years studying her methods. I know when she's setting up a situation. I've just never had proof before. This is ridiculous, Vanessa spluttered. You're making up stories to cover your theft. Actually, I said there's a way to settle this definitively. I turned toward the back of the room where Giovanni, the restaurant owner, had been quietly observing the scene. Giovanni, would you mind sharing what we discussed during the planning for tonight's event? Giovanni stepped forward, his professional demeanor tinged with discomfort at being drawn into family drama. When Miss Williams was organizing this celebration, she asked about our security measures. I informed her that after a theft last year, we installed discrete security cameras in all our private dining rooms. They are primarily for the protection of our guests' belongings, but they record continuously. The color drained from Vanessa's face so rapidly that for a moment I thought she might faint. You knew, she whispered, staring at me. You knew there were cameras and you let me. I knew there were cameras, I confirmed. What I didn't know was exactly what you were planning. But when I saw you hiding something in that bag, I suspected it might be something like this. I just didn't think you'd go quite so far as to publicly accuse me of theft. Eric had been listening to this exchange with growing horror on his face. Now he stood up abruptly. Giovanni, can we see this security footage right now? Giovanni nodded. Of course. We can access it in my office immediately. I don't think that's necessary, Vanessa said quickly, her voice high and tight. This has gotten out of hand. It was obviously just a misunderstanding. But Eric was already moving toward Giovanni, his expression grim. I want to see the footage. Now. I remained seated as Eric, my father, and Giovanni left the room. The atmosphere they left behind was thick with tension. Vanessa remained standing, her hands gripping the back of her chair so tightly her knuckles were white. My mother looked between us, her expression unreadable. Julia had a small, satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The minutes stretched on interminably. No one spoke. The remaining guests fidgeted uncomfortably, clearly wishing they could leave, but trapped by social convention in this excruciating situation. Finally, the door opened and Eric returned. His face was set in hard lines I had never seen before, his eyes cold as they fixed on his wife. The cameras show everything, he said, his voice flat. They show Vanessa taking a wallet from her purse, placing it in the tote bag, and positioning the bag between the chairs. They show her checking repeatedly to make sure Gabriella hadn't noticed, and they clearly show her removing the wallet during her dramatic accusation. Every eye in the room turned to Vanessa, whose face now showed genuine fear. Eric, she began, I can explain. Don't, he cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. Just don't. We'll discuss this at home. The silence that followed was deafening. I had waited years for this moment of vindication, for someone in my family to finally see Vanessa for who she truly was. But now that it had arrived, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness for my brother and niece. I stood up slowly, drawing all eyes to me. Mom, Dad, I said gently, I'm so sorry that this happened during your celebration. This evening was supposed to be about your 40 years of love and commitment, not about any of this. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but they were different from the ones I had seen earlier. Oh, Gabriella, she said, we're the ones who should be sorry. We should have seen what was happening. I moved around the table to embrace her, and as I did, I felt the weight of years of silent suffering begin to lift. Whatever happened next, the truth was finally out in the open. The remainder of the anniversary dinner proceeded in a strange, subdued atmosphere. Vanessa sat rigid in her chair, barely touching her dessert, while Eric maintained a cold silence beside her. Lucy, sensing the tension but not understanding its source, grew increasingly fussy until Julia quietly offered to take her outside for a walk. My parents made a valiant effort to salvage the celebration, thanking guests for coming and reminiscing about happy moments from their marriage. But the emotional undercurrent was impossible to ignore. Their closest friends rallied admirably, engaging in conversation and sharing their own stories, creating pockets of genuine warmth amidst the awkwardness. As the evening drew to a close and guests began to depart, each person who approached me did so with a new awareness in their eyes. Some offered quiet apologies for having doubted me. Others simply squeezed my hand or shoulder in silent support. Helen, my mother's best friend, pulled me into a tight hug. "I always knew that woman was trouble," she whispered fiercely in my ear. "Good for you for standing your ground." My father looked shell-shocked, the lines in his face deeper than I had ever seen them. As he helped my mother with her coat, I saw him place a protective hand on her back, as if the evening's events had reminded him of the preciousness and fragility of family bonds. When only immediate family remained, my father finally spoke directly about what had happened. "I owe you an apology, Gabriella," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "We've seen the tension between you and Vanessa for years, but we told ourselves it was normal in law dynamics. We never imagined it went this deep." My mother nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. "We should have protected you better. We were so focused on keeping the peace that we didn't see who was really disturbing it." "It's not your fault," I assured them. "Vanessa is extremely skilled at presenting one face to some people and another to others. And I never wanted to force anyone to take sides." Eric, who had been standing silently by the door waiting for Vanessa to return from the restroom where she had retreated after Julia brought Lucy back, now approached us. "I need to talk to you," he said to me, his voice rough with emotion. "Alone, if that's okay." We stepped out onto the same patio where I had collected myself earlier in the evening. The night had grown cooler, and I wrapped my arms around myself against the chill. Eric looked out at the city lights for a long moment before speaking. "I don't even know where to begin," he finally said. "I feel like the world's biggest fool." "You're not a fool," I said gently. "You're someone who wanted to believe the best about the person you love. There's nothing foolish about that." He shook his head sharply. "Stop being so understanding. I don't deserve it. For years I've dismissed your feelings, defended her behavior, even accused you of being jealous or difficult. And all this time," his voice cracked, "all this time she was deliberately trying to hurt you, to drive a wedge between us. I had imagined this moment of validation countless times over the years, but now that it was here, I found no satisfaction in my brother's pain." "What are you going to do?" I asked quietly. Eric ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking exhausted. "I don't know. I need to think about Lucy, about what's best for her. But I know I can't just pretend this didn't happen. What Vanessa did tonight, it wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was calculated, cruel. It makes me wonder what else she's capable of." Before I could respond, the door to the patio opened and Vanessa emerged. Her makeup had been freshly applied, but it couldn't hide the redness around her eyes or the tight defensive set of her mouth. "The car is waiting," she said to Eric, her voice brittle. "Lucy is tired." Eric looked at her for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression, a hardening that I had never witnessed before. "Take Lucy home," he said. "I'll get a ride with my parents, or Gabriella. We need some space tonight." Vanessa's composure slipped, revealing a flash of panic. "Eric, please, we need to talk about this." "Yes, we do," he agreed. "But not tonight. Tonight I need to process what I saw on that security footage." For a moment I thought Vanessa might argue further, but after a tense silence she simply nodded stiffly and walked away. The sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood floors faded as she returned to collect Lucy. After she left, Eric turned back to me. "I am so sorry, Gabs. I know those words aren't enough, but they're all I have right now." I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "They're enough for tonight. The rest we can figure out as we go." When we returned inside, my parents and Julia were waiting. The five of us, our core family unit, without Vanessa's divisive presence, stood together in a moment of wordless reconnection. Then Julia broke the silence with her characteristic directness. Well, that was the most dramatic anniversary dinner in history. Congratulations, Mom and Dad, you'll definitely remember this one. Surprisingly, this broke the tension. My father chuckled, my mother smiled through her tears, and even Eric managed a weak laugh. We gathered our things, thanked Giovanni profusely for his discretion and help, and made our way out into the night. As we stood on the sidewalk saying our goodbyes, my mother pulled me into a fierce hug. "I am so proud of how you handled yourself tonight," she whispered. "You showed grace under incredible pressure." I learned from the best, I told her, holding her tight. As I drove home alone later, the events of the evening replayed in my mind. The satisfaction of finally having the truth exposed was tempered by concern for my brother and niece. Family dynamics were complicated, and I knew that tonight's revelations would have far-reaching consequences for all of us. But for the first time in 6 years, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The constant need to defend myself, to question my own perceptions, to walk on eggshells around Vanessa, all of it was shifting. The truth had a power of its own, and once revealed, it could not be unseen. When I reached my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and poured myself a small glass of wine. Sitting by the window overlooking the city, I raised the glass in a silent toast to my parents' 40 years of marriage, to truth, and to the uncertain but hopeful future of our family. In the weeks following the infamous anniversary dinner, our family entered a period of painful but necessary transformation. The immediate aftermath was as difficult as I had anticipated. Eric moved into our parents' guest room, temporarily explaining to Lucy that Daddy needed to help Grandpa with some projects. It was a flimsy excuse that the perceptive 4-year-old clearly didn't fully believe, but it provided a gentle buffer while the adults sorted through the debris of Vanessa's deception. Vanessa, for her part, cycled through a range of strategies to manage the fallout. First came tearful apologies and claims that she had suffered a momentary breakdown due to stress. When those fell on deaf ears, she attempted to minimize her actions, suggesting everyone was overreacting to what was merely a misguided prank. Finally, when those approaches failed, she resorted to what I suspected was her true nature: cold calculation, hiring an expensive divorce attorney and threatening to limit Eric's access to Lucy if he pursued separation. That final move backfired spectacularly. The security footage from the restaurant, which Giovanni had preserved, provided compelling evidence of Vanessa's deliberate attempt to frame me and damage my reputation. When Eric's attorney suggested, this demonstrated a pattern of manipulative behavior that might be relevant in custody considerations. Vanessa's aggressive stance softened considerably. By the 3-month mark after the dinner, Eric had filed for divorce and moved into his own apartment. He and Vanessa had established a tentative co-parenting arrangement, with Lucy spending equal time with both parents. The transition was hardest on Lucy, who couldn't understand why her family had suddenly fractured. I made a special effort to maintain my relationship with my niece, arranging regular outings to the zoo, children's museums, and parks when she was with Eric. "Aunt Gabby," she asked me during one of these outings, as we shared ice cream on a park bench, "did Mommy do something bad?" The question caught me off guard, and I chose my words carefully. Grown-ups sometimes make mistakes in how they treat each other. Your mom and dad are working through some grown-up problems, but they both love you very much. That will never change. Lucy seemed to consider this seriously, then nodded with the simple acceptance children often show for complex situations. "Daddy's sad a lot now," she observed, "but he smiles more when you visit." My relationship with my parents also evolved during this period. My father, the lifelong educator, took the situation as a personal failure. "I should have seen what was happening," he told me during a private conversation. "I observed students and their dynamics for 35 years, but I missed what was right in front of me in my own family." "Dad," I reminded him gently, "Vanessa fooled a lot of people for a long time. That was her specialty." My mother, ever the nurturer, focused on healing the family bonds that had been strained. She instituted weekly family dinners minus Vanessa, where we gradually relearned how to communicate openly. These gatherings were awkward at first, with Eric particularly subdued, but over time they became a sanctuary where authentic connection could flourish again. Julia, true to form, approached the situation with her characteristic directness. "I've been waiting 6 years to say I told you so," she announced to Eric at one of these dinners. "But now that I can, it doesn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would." Her honesty somehow broke through some of the tension, and Eric actually laughed, perhaps his first genuine laugh since that night. As for me, the vindication I had longed for came with unexpected emotional complications. For years, I had channeled my frustration with Vanessa into my work, using graphic design projects as an outlet for the emotions I couldn't express within the family. Now that the truth was known, I found myself at a creative crossroads, unsure where to direct that energy. The initial weeks after the dinner were difficult. I experienced a roller coaster of emotions: relief that the truth was finally out, anger at the years of gaslighting I had endured, guilt over my brother's pain, and anxiety about the future. There were nights I lay awake, replaying every interaction with Vanessa, seeing with new clarity the calculated nature of her behavior from the very beginning. During this period, I sought help from a therapist, Dr. Catherine Torres, who specialized in family dynamics and emotional recovery. Her guidance was invaluable as I processed the complex aftermath of long-term manipulation. "What you experienced was a form of psychological abuse," she explained during one session. "Having your perceptions repeatedly denied or dismissed can make you question your own reality. That's called gaslighting, and recovery takes time." With Dr. Torres's help, I began to rebuild my sense of self-trust. I reconnected with friends who had drifted away during the Vanessa years, many of whom had sensed something was wrong but hadn't known how to help. I focused on self-care, setting aside time for activities that nourished my spirit, hiking along Lake Michigan, taking a pottery class. I'd always been curious about reading for pleasure again. Professionally, I channeled my renewed energy into my design business. I had always been good at my work, but now I found a new level of confidence in my creative vision. I took risks with clients I might have avoided before, proposing bold concepts that pushed boundaries. To my surprise, these were often the ideas that resonated most strongly. Within 6 months, I had landed 2 major contracts with national brands and hired my first employee to help manage the increased workload. The most profound healing, however, came through an unexpected channel. About 4 months after the anniversary dinner, I received a message from a woman named Sophia, who introduced herself as Vanessa's former college roommate. She had heard about the incident through mutual acquaintances and reached out because, as she put it, "I've been where you are." Over coffee at a quiet cafe, Sophia shared her own experiences with Vanessa during their university years. The patterns were strikingly familiar: the careful cultivation of allies, the subtle undermining, the elaborate setups designed to make Sophia appear unstable or unreliable. The conversation was both validating and healing, a confirmation that what I had experienced wasn't isolated or imagined. "It took me years to trust my own perceptions again after living with her," Sophia confessed. "But you know what helped the most? Finding others who had been through similar experiences, knowing I wasn't alone." Inspired by this connection, I started a small private support group for people recovering from relationships with manipulative individuals. We met monthly in a community center, sharing stories and strategies for healing. Through helping others, I found my own path forward, transforming pain into purpose. As the 1-year anniversary of that fateful dinner approached, I reflected on everything that had changed. Eric was dating again cautiously, a kind kindergarten teacher he had met at one of Lucy's school events. My parents seemed lighter, their relationship strengthened by weathering the family crisis together. Julia had been promoted at the hospital and was considering a master's degree in nursing administration. And me, I had learned lessons that would shape the rest of my life. I had learned the value of patience, of strategic thinking, of waiting for the right moment rather than reacting immediately to provocation. I had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to manipulation is simply allowing the truth to reveal itself in its own time. Most importantly, I had learned that standing in your truth, even when others doubt you, is not selfishness, but self-preservation. For years, I had silenced myself to keep the peace, believing that harmony required my silence. Now I understood that real harmony can only exist where truth is honored and respected. The last time I saw Vanessa was at Lucy's 5th birthday party, a carefully orchestrated neutral event held at a children's play center. We acknowledged each other with tight nods from across the room but didn't speak. I noticed that she wore a mask of cheerful politeness that never quite reached her eyes, and I wondered if she had already found new targets for her manipulations. But that was no longer my concern. I had reclaimed my voice, my family, and my power. The journey through pain had led to a place of authentic strength. And that perhaps is the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest growth comes through our deepest wounds. The very experiences designed to break us can become the foundation for building a more genuine, powerful version of ourselves if we have the courage to face them honestly and the wisdom to transform them into something meaningful. Have you ever experienced someone trying to manipulate a situation against you? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing in their truth is always worth it, even when it's difficult. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the most powerful response to manipulation is simply knowing your own worth and waiting for the truth to emerge.